episode titled Peppa's Creepy Eyes. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa and George were playing on the floor. Peppa felt as usual, happily playing with her toys. But today, something strange began to happen. She suddenly felt a weird sensation in her eyes. At first, it was a light tingling, and then it felt like someone was pulling her eyes, stretching them. She didn't pay much attention to it at first. Breakfast passed like usual, but Peppa still felt a strange heaviness in her eyes. When she went to her room to play, she looked in the mirror and froze. Under her eyes, two new small eyes had appeared, moving as if they were alive. Peppa couldn't understand what was happening, but the eyes clearly weren't hers. "Mummy! Daddy!" she cried, but no one came. Peppa stepped closer to the mirror and saw the new eyes turning, following her movements. She touched them, but they were cold and unmoving. When Mummy Pig entered the room, she didn't notice anything unusual. Peppa tried to explain what was happening to her, but she couldn't find the words. The new eyes kept watching her, moving on their own, and Peppa began to doubt whether she was losing her mind. That evening, when the family sat down for dinner, Peppa felt another eye appear on her neck. It was smaller, but just like the others. Soon, there were several more, on her forehead, on her arms, and each eye was watching. Peppa tried to hide them, but they kept becoming more active, and with every passing moment, she felt like she was losing control over her own body. Peppa tried to run out of the house, but every time she turned around, the eyes were following her, creating an overwhelming sense of being watched. One night, she woke up to a strange whispering. At first, she thought it was in her head, but soon she realized that it was coming from her eyes. "Don't be afraid," the eyes on her neck whispered softly. Peppa screamed and ran into the hallway. She locked the door, but in a moment her eyes started moving again, lifting up to the mirror, looking in different directions. All of her eyes, as if under control, started whispering the same thing. "You're not alone." A sense of dread and fear overtook Peppa. She didn't know what was happening to her. Only one thought kept spinning in her mind. What if these eyes weren't just a part of her, but something more? What if they were watching her, waiting to take her away? Episode titled Mysterious Toy. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa and George were playing. Everything was as usual, but something strange happened that day. When Peppa woke up in the morning, she noticed something on her bed that hadn't been there before. A plush teddy bear. It was sitting on her pillow with wide, unblinking eyes staring at her. "Mummy, Daddy!" Peppa cried out. "Who left this bear on my bed?" Mummy Pig walked over and picked up the toy. "We didn't buy you a bear, Peppa," she said, sounding slightly surprised. "Maybe one of your friends left it here." But Peppa knew for sure that she hadn't seen this bear before. She felt an odd unease as the bear's eyes seemed to follow her every movement. Peppa tried to distract herself and keep playing with George, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the bear. Later that evening, as everyone was preparing to go to sleep, Peppa placed the bear on the floor beside her bed, deciding to leave it there so she wouldn't have to think about it. However, in the middle of the night, she woke up to a strange sound and saw that the bear was back on her pillow. Peppa froze. She had clearly seen her place it on the floor earlier. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself, trying to calm down. Maybe it was just a dream. But the next morning, the same thing happened. The bear was back on her pillow. The more Peppa tried to ignore it, the stranger things became. At night, she heard the toy rustling quietly, and its small plastic eyes seemed to glow brighter. Peppa constantly felt as if the bear was watching her. One night when Peppa woke up, she saw the bear standing right beside her bed. It wasn't sitting like usual. It was standing, its paws stretched out in front of it, and its eyes staring at her with an expression as if it was ready to say something. Peppa screamed and jumped out of bed, but the bear remained in place. Peppa was terrified, but then she gathered her courage and decided to investigate. She got up and walked over to the bear. Its eyes were still gleaming, but now, as she got closer, she heard a faint whisper. "You don't have to be afraid of me." Peppa froze, her heart pounding in her chest. This couldn't just be a toy. It was something more. She ran out of the room and didn't return to the bear. From that moment on, she decided it was best to get rid of it. Peppa placed the bear in a box and left it outside, far away from the house. However, when she returned home the next morning, another surprise awaited her. The bear was standing by the door as if it had never left. Episode titled Creepy Copies. It was a normal morning at the Pig family house. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper, and Peppa was playing in her room. Suddenly, she noticed something strange in the kitchen. She walked over to the door, peered inside, and froze. There, standing at the table, was a copy of herself. "Peppa!" Mummy Pig called out, but Peppa didn't respond as her copy smiled and took a step aside, mimicking her every move. "Mom!" Peppa shouted, but when she turned around, the copy had disappeared. Peppa thought it must have been her imagination. She returned to her room and resumed playing. However, the next morning, when Peppa entered the kitchen, the situation repeated itself. This time, the copy was dressed differently, and there was something off about her. Her smile was wider and her eyes brighter. She stood at the table, staring at Peppa. Peppa froze. "Mom!" she shouted again, but Mummy Pig didn't notice anything strange. Everything seemed fine. Peppa began to fear that her imagination was playing tricks on her, but the strange occurrences continued. Every morning, when she entered the kitchen or the living room, she would see a new copy of herself. They looked similar, but each time something changed. One copy was slightly taller, another had a more vacant, strange expression on her face. Sometimes they just stood there watching, and other times they would mimic Peppa's actions. Peppa tried to ignore them, but the more she did, the more they appeared. One evening, after Peppa returned from the garden, she heard someone laughing in her room. It was her laugh, but with an unsettling edge to it. Peppa walked into the room and saw a group of her copies. They were all sitting, watching her and giggling. Each copy was slightly different from the last, and their laughter had taken on an eerie quality. Peppa felt a chill down her spine and tried to leave, but the door was locked. She was trapped. The copies began moving toward her, mimicking her every movement, as if they were her, but with something darker in their eyes. "You can't leave," one of the copies said. "We are all part of you." Peppa was terrified. She tried to escape, but no door would open. Everything felt like a nightmare. Each copy seemed to want to replace her. Soon, all the copies disappeared. Peppa woke up in her room. She wasn't sure if it had been a dream or reality, but she definitely felt that something was wrong. The next morning, Peppa woke up and, as usual, went to the kitchen. But her heart stopped when she saw that sitting at the table was a new copy of herself. This one had an even stranger smile and eyes. Episode titled The New House. It was a normal morning. Everything in the Pig family house was calm. Mummy Pig was packing things. Daddy Pig was carrying boxes. Peppa stood nearby and watched. George was playing on the floor with his dinosaur. That day, the family was moving to a new house. Daddy Pig said it was bigger and better. Peppa was not sure. They arrived at the house. It stood alone, a little far from the road. The windows were dark. The door was closed. Daddy Pig opened it. They walked inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The floor creaked. The rooms were empty, but they did not feel abandoned. It felt like someone had been there recently. Mummy Pig started unpacking. Daddy Pig checked the rooms. Peppa walked down the hallway. She stopped. It felt like someone moved ahead of her, but no one was there. She said nothing. During the day, everything seemed calm. They arranged furniture. George played in the corner, but sometimes he looked toward an empty wall and quietly said, "Dinosaur." Peppa noticed this. In the evening, the family sat at the table. They ate and talked. Everything seemed normal, but sometimes a quiet sound came from other rooms, like footsteps. Daddy Pig said it was just the house settling. At night, Peppa woke up. The house was dark. She heard footsteps. They were in the hallway. Peppa quietly got up and walked to the door. She looked out. In the hallway, there was a figure. It was not moving. Peppa froze. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Why are you awake?" Peppa turned around. It was Daddy Pig. He looked normal. Peppa looked back into the hallway. It was empty. In the morning, everything looked normal. Peppa went downstairs. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. George was playing. Peppa sat at the table. She looked at the wall. There was a photo. It showed their family, but next to them there was someone else. Episode titled Peppa's Clones. It was a normal morning. Everything in the Pig family house was calm. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. George was playing on the floor with his dinosaur. Peppa came downstairs and said hello. Everything looked the same as always. After breakfast, Daddy Pig said he was working on a new project. He looked very pleased. Peppa asked what the project was. Daddy Pig said he would show her later. Peppa said nothing. During the day, Daddy Pig went into the garage. He closed the door. Peppa quietly walked closer and tried to look inside. It was dark, but she saw light. She heard a soft sound, as if something was repeating. Peppa stepped away. In the evening, Daddy Pig called her. He said he was ready to show it. Peppa walked into the garage. There was another Peppa. She looked exactly the same. She was standing still. Peppa stopped. Daddy Pig said it was his experiment. He said he made a copy. Peppa said nothing. She walked closer. The clone opened its eyes. It looked straight at her. Peppa stepped back. Daddy Pig said everything was under control. Peppa nodded. At night, Peppa woke up. The house was quiet. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Peppa walked out of her room. There was another Peppa in the hallway. It was not moving. Peppa thought it was the clone. She quietly said her name. The clone did not answer. Then it slowly took a step forward. Peppa closed her door. In the morning, everything looked normal. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. George was playing. Peppa sat at the table. She looked at Daddy Pig. He smiled. Peppa said nothing. During the day, she went to the garage. The door was open. Inside, there were several Peppas. They were standing next to each other, all identical. Peppa did not move. One of the clones turned its head. Then another, then another. They were looking at her. Peppa quickly closed the door. In the evening, she came back to the kitchen. At the table were Mummy Pig, Daddy Pig, and George, and another Peppa. She was already eating. Peppa stopped. She did not know where to sit. Episode titled The Strange Room. It was a normal morning. Everything in the Pig family house was calm. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. George was playing on the floor with his dinosaur. Peppa came downstairs and said hello. Everything looked the same as always. After breakfast, Peppa went to play. She walked down the hallway and stopped. Something about the wall looked different. She touched it. In one place, she felt a small handle. Peppa paused. She did not remember a door being there. She pulled the handle. The wall slowly opened. Behind it was a narrow passage. Peppa walked inside. It was quiet and dark. She walked forward until she saw light. At the end, there was a room. Peppa entered. She froze. The room looked exactly like their kitchen. Mummy Pig was standing by the stove. Daddy Pig was sitting at the table. George was playing on the floor. Everything was the same. But something was wrong. Their eyes were round and dark. They did not blink. They were looking directly at Peppa. Mummy Pig smiled. "Peppa, come here," she said. The voice sounded flat. Daddy Pig smiled too. Peppa did not move closer. She stepped back. George lifted his head. He said, "Dinosaur." But his voice was slower and quieter. Peppa turned and ran out of the room. She closed the door. She returned to the hallway. Everything looked normal again. Peppa said nothing. In the evening, she walked past the wall again. The door was closed. But now there was a quiet sound behind it, like whispering. Peppa did not open it. At night, Peppa woke up. The house was silent. She heard a voice. It sounded like Mummy Pig. "Peppa, come here." Peppa did not move. The voice was closer. It was behind the wall. Then she heard a soft knocking. Peppa closed her eyes. In the morning, everything looked normal. Peppa came downstairs. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. George was playing. Peppa sat at the table. She looked at their faces. Everything seemed normal. Then she looked at the wall. There was a small handle. It was slowly moving.